So again, we're talking about quadratic equations, and so the general form of a quadratic equation looks like this. It's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. All right. And the first thing you did was when we solved quadratic equations, the first thing we talked about was factoring. So we solved quadratic equations using factoring. But remember, not all quadratic polynomials are factorable. So since some of these cannot be factored, and the ones that couldn't be factored, by the way, are the ones where the solutions were imaginary or irrational. Those are ones in which you could not have factored. So if they're not factorable, then the other thing we did was we talked about solving it using the quadratic formula, right? But then the third thing we did was we saw that if it's already in that form where you have some expression squared equal a number, I don't have to use a quadratic formula. I can just use what property? Square root property. And now the fourth way, or the other idea behind solving a quadratic equation, is by completing a square. Now the idea of completing the square is really important when we're talking about circles. So you can't say, well, do I have to complete the square when solving these equations? If the direction says so, you do so. If it doesn't, then I will go directly to the quadratic formula. But you do need to know it for circles. You can't get by doing circles without knowing how to complete the square. All right, the idea behind completing the square is this, and listen carefully. At some point, when you do all this work, and sometimes it can be a little bit messy, because you'll have fractions sometimes. Sometimes you do so when you do all this work, you're going to end up with some expression squared equal a number. You end up with that. And at that point, then what would you do?
Square root property.
Square root property. So completing the square eventually involves you using what property? Square root property. You eventually use the square root property. Okay? So you can see how that's going to look. So let's look at number 1. So go ahead and take that handout, have it on the side. So number 1, we're going to do this by completing a square. So solve by completing the square. So we have x squared minus 8x plus 15 equals 0. Now, this particular case, this equation is factorable. I can factor this. But that's not what the direction says. What does the direction say? Solve by completing the square. So if on the worksheet it is factorable and you factor instead of completing the square, you get 0 points. Read the directions. So I know you can factor. I need to know, can you complete the square? That's the whole point of these directions. All right, so listen carefully to the steps. Step 1. If the leading coefficient, and the leading coefficient means if I put this in descending order, which it is, the leading coefficient would be the coefficient of x squared. That's the leading coefficient. So the leading coefficient is the coefficient of x squared. So you want the coefficient to be a 1. In this case, is it a 1? Yes, the leading coefficient of x squared is a 1. In fact, the ones we're going to do today will be 1s. So next week, we'll do one where it's not a 1, and we're going to see what we have to do. So the leading coefficient is a 1. All right, that's step 1. Step 2. Step 2 says, isolate the variable terms on one side, your constant on the other. So that means I got to do what? Subtract 15 from both sides. So I'm going to get x squared minus 8x. Leave some space. Leave a space here. Equal, and then negative 15. And you can see why I said leave a space. So leave some space here. All right, so that was step 2. Step 3 is where we complete the square on the x's. All right, so there are 2 parts to this. So part A says this. Part A says add the square of half the coefficient of x to both sides of the equation. So add the square of half the coefficient of x to both sides of the equation. So basically what that means is this. Notice it said the coefficient of x, not the coefficient of x squared, the coefficient of x. So what's the coefficient of x here? -8. Now you said 1. Y'all do know the difference. This is x squared, this is what? X. Okay. The coefficient of x. What's the coefficient of x? -8. All right, so here's the way I would do this. I would write down -8. Write it down. All right, so I took the coefficient of x, which is -8, and then still in part A it says I got to take half of x. So divide by 2. Divide by 2. So then what I would do is this. I would, once I write down the coefficient, I would then say divide by 2. Follow Joshua?
Yes, sir.
Okay, see you at the class.
Yes, sir.
All right, divide by 2. Okay. Okay, now what's -8 divided by 2? -4. Okay? -4. So right underneath, I'd put -4. Just our thought process. So remember, that's what it says. Take half the coefficient of x. So did I take half the coefficient of x?
Yeah.
All right, then it says this, still in part A. I've got to square that number now. So I got to put that in parentheses and do what to it? Square it. So that's the idea of completing the square. Square. And what does that equal? 16. Okay? 16. Should always be a positive number. 16. Then still part A says, once I get that, then I got to do what to both sides? Add that number to both sides. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Okay? All right, so that's where we're at. That's part A. So it's a very simple process. It's a very simple process. You take the coefficient of x, divide it by 2. Once you divide by 2, you do what to it? Square it, and then you add it to both sides. All right, now let's do part B. Part B says, once you do this, once you add the square of half the coefficient of x, if you did this correctly, the left-hand side should be factorable. Always. In other words, when you factor this, it will be a binomial times itself. So when I factor the left-hand side, just out of our thought processes, those two factors better be the same. They should always be the same. So when I factor x squared minus 8x plus 16, that'll be x minus 4 what? Times x minus 4, right?
Right.
Okay. Y'all agree that's what this is?
Yeah.
So now, what you want to do is, remember from a previous course, another way to write x minus 4 times x minus 4 is by just saying x minus 4 squared. Okay, so now we get x minus 4 squared. So I'm going to go from here to here, equal, and what's negative 15 plus 16? 1. All right, so that was part B. And then finally, think about what we just talked about, how to get the variable x by itself. What's the next step? Square root both sides. So that's the last part. So number 4 says use the square root property. All right, so then we take the square root of both sides, and we're done. Now, before I go on, are my solutions going to be real or imaginary? Real. Because this is going to be the square root of a positive number, right? So it'll be real. Is going to be rational, irrational? Rational, because 1's a perfect square. Square root of 1 is 1. Okay? All right, so then the next step, remember, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. So you take the square root of both sides, plus or minus. So the square and the square root don't do each other. So you get x minus 4 equal plus or minus 1. Square root of 1 is what? 1. At that point, remember, always ask yourself, because if whatever kind of solutions it is will determine what your next step is. Are my solutions rational or irrational? Rational, so that's why you split it apart. Remember that? So since they're rational, you have to split it into separate equations. So you got to say x minus 4 equal 1, and then x minus 4 equal what? Negative 1. So then you just solve these linear equations. So you add 4 to both sides. So what's one of my solutions? 5. Add 4 to both sides. What's the other solution? 3. Okay, so those are your two rational solutions. So completing the square. Let's do another. We're completing the square. Okay, number 2. So the squared property should not be the issue anymore, because we did at least 6 now using the square root property. What you got to work on now is using the steps to completing a square. That's what you got to work on. So that's number 2. All right, number 2, let's suppose we had m squared minus 6m minus 55 equal 0. So m squared minus 6m minus 55 equals 0. And I remember, do not use quadratic formula, because they want you to do this by completing a square. Okay, I know you all can use quadratic formula. That's not the point there. The point is, can you do this by completing the square? Okay, so follow the steps. First of all, the coefficient of your leading term must be 1, is it? Yes. Yes, because m squared has a coefficient of 1. All right, now go to the next step. What's the next step tell us to do? Yeah, bring the barrel to one side, constant the other. Am I at that point?
Yep.
Yeah, so I just got to do what?
Add 55.
Add 55 to both sides. So do you all agree that you would then write m squared minus 6m, leave some space, and that's going to equal what? 55? All right. So now we go to the next step. The next step says I look at which coefficient? Coefficient of m. What's the coefficient of m? Negative 6. Negative 6. And we'll write it down. Negative 6. What must I do to that negative 6? Divide it by 2. So right now, the coefficients look like they're even numbers. So I'm going to get a nice number, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I get that to be negative 3? Okay. Then what must I do to that negative 3? Square. So I got to square negative 3, just like this. And when I square negative 3, I better get a positive 9. Positive 9 should always be positive. Once I square, what's the next step? Add it to both sides. So remember I left some space here? So you're going to say plus 9, plus 9. If you're doing this correctly, the left-hand side should now be factorable.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be factorable as a binomial times itself. So binomial squared. So what do you think that is? Yeah. So x, m, someone said x, so, but it's not x, it's what? M. And it's easy to determine your binomial. Because you see what I have in parentheses? What do you see here? Negative 3. What do you see here? Negative 3. So we went back to the previous one. Number 1, what do you see here? What do you see here? Negative 4. All right. So m minus 3 times m minus 3 will be this trinomial. And what does that equal? 64? All right. Once you get to that point, I've got to solve for the variable m, so what's the next step? Take the square root of both sides. Over here, the plus or minus. So square root, plus or minus. So the square and square root into each other, so what are you left with?
Minus 3.
Equal, plus or minus
8.
8. All right, so at that point, you got to ask yourself, do I get real or imaginary? Real. Are they rational or irrational? Rational, so split it apart. So I have these, so I went from a quadratic equation to two linear when I split it apart. So, no, positive 55. You add 55 to both sides. Plus 55, plus 55. Okay? So m minus 3, huh? Square root of 64. So 8, and then m minus 3 equal a what? Negative 8. So how to get the variable m by itself? Add 3. So what's one of my solutions? 11. When I add 3 to both sides here, what's the other solution? Negative 5. Okay, number 3. Number 3, let's suppose I had this. M squared equal negative 14m minus 37. M squared equal negative 14m minus 37. Again, I want to solve this by completing the square, not by quadratic formula. Completing the square. So if I'm going to use completing the square, then I got to first of all make sure the coefficient of my leading term is 1, and it is. Secondly, I got to make sure that the variable terms on one side, the constants on the other. Is that the case here?
No.
No. So what does I got to do?
Move over to 14.
So add 14 to both sides, and then leave some space. All right. So tell me what to write.
M squared plus 14.
Leave some space equal
Negative 37.
negative 37. All right. So that's where we're at. All right. Now, what's the next step?
Say 14.
Take the coefficient of m, which is 14. 14 divided by 2. So let's write that down. So you can say 14 divided by 2 equal a 7, right? So let me take that 7, and what do I do that 7? I square it. No, you got to do what next? Square first, right? Which is what? 49. So there are times, and there's always one person that does this in a worksheet. Hopefully by the time the test comes, I can't remember, but the mistake is corrected. They add 7 to both sides. It's not true. You got to square first. So remember, complete the square. So you get 49, right? Now, what do I do at 49? Add it to both sides. Just like that. So notice, you got to try and mimic what I'm doing here. If you're doing this correctly, the left side, that trinomial, should now be factorable. And when you factor, the two binomials better be the same. What's that binomial?
M plus 7.
M plus 7. Because what do you see in that inside the parentheses being squared? A positive 7 or a negative 7? Positive 7. And you know it cannot be negative because I've had this sometimes. Okay, listen carefully. You know it cannot be that because what's the sign of the middle term? Positive. If you follow this out, the sign of the middle term is going to be negative. So it has to be a plus sign. And what does that equal? 12? Okay, so that's where we're at. And the rest of this is stuff we had previously and today. What's the next step? Square root. Take the square root of both sides. So we're using the square root property. So we take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this over. Okay, square root, plus or minus. Okay, before I go 1, because we need to determine how to write our solutions in the end, real or imaginary? Real, because 12 is positive. Rational or irrational? Irrational. So you can write in that compact form. You don't have to split it apart. So what I would do is this. These undo each other, so you get m plus 7 equal plus or minus, but you do got to simplify the square root of 12. 4 and 3. So it'll be 2 square root of 3. All right. One more step and you're done, because when you do this by completing the square, notice that the coefficient of m is always what number? 1. Always be a 1 when you do this by completing the square. So all you got to do now is just do what? Subtract 7, rewrite it, and you're done. So what's the answer? Negative 7 plus or minus 2 square root of 3. Okay. Number 3. Completing the square. All right, let's do one more with completing the square, and that should be enough for practice with that. You should have a handle on it. Now, next class period, though, we're not done, but next class period, when I say next class period, you're like, oh God, he's done, thank God. No, I'm not done yet. Next class period, I'm going to do one where the coefficient of the leading term is not 1, so you can see what to do at that point. But the one in your, when it's that case, it's a little bit more tedious, so on your test, if you're going to do one by completing a square, it'll be like these. So it'll be the easy kind. Okay, number 4. This number 4, we're going to do one more, and that should be enough for you. Okay, suppose we had x squared minus 4x plus 5 equal 0. Actually, let me do this first. I'm sorry. Let me do this one. X squared minus 4x plus 1 equal negative 5. Let's do that one instead. All right, so that's where I'm at. First of all, is the coefficient of x squared 1? Yeah. So remember, the next step is to bring all the variable terms to one side, constants on the other. So what's the next step at that point? Subtract 1. Okay, good. Subtract 1. And then leave some space. So I have x squared minus 4x, leave some space, and that's equal to what? Negative 6. Okay. All right, so now let's do the next part. So what's the next step? Take negative 4, coefficient of x, divided by 2. Yeah, so negative 4 divided by 2 is a negative 2, right? What do I do to that negative 2, though? I square, and what do I get? 4. That should always be positive, by the way. So never add a negative to both sides. You'll always be adding a what to both sides? Positive.
Did you divide a 4 as 6?
Say it again?
No,
So you take the coefficient of x.
I just couldn't.
Yeah, it's a negative 4. It's a negative 4. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So I get x, so now this point, if you're doing this correctly, the left side should now be factorable, will be a binomial times itself. What's that binomial? X minus 2, good. X minus 2. Squared equal a what?
Negative.
Negative 2?
Mm-hmm.
So now can I use the square root property?
Yes.
Yep. So take the square root of both sides. Plus or minus. And before I go on, are these going to be real or imaginary? Imaginary. All right, so the square and square don't do each other. So you get x minus 2 equal, now let's talk about the square root of a negative 2. That's just what? I square root of 2. That's all it is. Because you can't simplify the square root of 2, right? So plus or minus I square root of 2. One more step and you're done. What's the next step? Add 2 to both sides. So x equal, what's the answer?
2 plus or minus I square root
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, so completing the square involves the square root property, which we've already talked about already. So the new thing is for you is just remembering the steps to completing the square, although I will give those to you. You just got to use them, know how to use them. Okay? So I'm going to give you that worksheet.